Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Som TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. Today's podcast, we are going to detox from what I think for a lot of people in California was a real harvest. There was no fires. I mean, there were some, but they weren't the dominant story. There were no floods. There was no war. They actually got to pick grapes and deal with them. I speak with Priyanka French, who you may know from her Drink a Bottle with Meg Zobek, also the documentary we just released on Harvest, which is something you should watch on Som TV. She is the head winemaker at Signorello and a very, very talented person. We detox on the harvest for this year, but also talk about the fact that they decided to bottle wine from last year's eponymous smoke-tainted vintage. And we talk about the implications of what that means, why they decided to do it, whether or not the wine's going to be good. It's really fascinating stuff. Before we do that, I want to tell you, go to somtv.com, watch the episodes I just mentioned. There is a documentary about Harvest 2021 featuring some of the greats in our films on the series and some of the greats just overall winemakers in the region. There is a new movie called A Chef's Voyage on 3-star Michelin restaurant Manresa. Really, really great film that has just launched. And we have so much more coming. Sparklers is coming November 23rd. That is something you do not want to miss. An incredibly bingeable show. Really, really fun with a great cast. All right, somtv.com, $49.99 for the year. Without further ado, let's detox. Priyanka, it's good to have you on. I appreciate it. I hope we can stay on the rails here and not go too far off the rails during this pod. Okay, first, let's start with Harvest is done. How do you feel?
I feel great. We actually got pressed out yesterday, which is a monumental moment, I think, because that's when, for me, harvest is truly over. You know, a lot of people look at it as harvest is over when fruit stops coming into the winery. But for me, I think that's more like one thing is now off of your list that you have to do. But when you're pressed out, that's when things slow down. Yeah.
That's quite a term. I got pressed out yesterday.
I was pressed out. Yeah.
Sounds like you have to find a new job or something. I'm not sure.
Well, it kind of feels like that because till yesterday I was, feeling good energy-wise and getting after it. You got to go in, you got to do this. There's that constant to-do list that's going on. And then yesterday, when we were done pressing and all the wine was pushed into tank, that's when the exhaustion just kind of hits you and you're like, yep, I'm pressed out. I'm done.
Yeah, makes sense. You're pressed out. Okay, that's a good term. I'm gonna start using that in my regular life. My wife will ask me to do laundry, and I will go, I am pressed out right now. I don't know if
pun intended.
Pun intended. So, okay, Priyanka, you're part of the Harvest documentary that's now live on Som TV that features.
Yeah.
I think, look, I'm biased here, but I think the most interesting winemakers in Napa, you, Carol Meredith, Megan Zobek,
Steve Mathiasen.
These are people I know and love and have deep, deep love for. You and Meg, though, also have a Drink a Bottle that's live on Som TV, which is hysterical, which we filmed in the middle of Harvest, and I can't believe you agreed to it, to be honest.
I can't believe, I must like you guys, because I can't believe I agreed to that either.
You guys sort of took like a tiny mini break, and I'm sure drank too much before you had to go back to work, but for people who are Som TV subscribers, these two ladies are absolutely hysterical together. So
thank you. Megan and I go way back. We've known each other, I think, close to a decade now here. We both started out in the industry around the same time. And it's just been so much fun and so inspiring to kind of follow each other's journey and support each other through it. So I was really excited to be doing that with her.
It's great. I spoke to Steve earlier. So there's a podcast about Harvest earlier in Napa. Napa's a good barometer. We know harvest happens all around the world. Southern Hemisphere obviously is not for a bit here. But Napa's a great barometer because it really sets a tone on how the Northern Hemisphere is going to go. Harvest a little earlier than France. And I want to talk to you now that it's done, different than Steve. You've come down from it. What did you suffer depression? Steve talks about this like it's depressing. The world's, it's going to end and you don't know what to do. And you look outside and it looks, like you're on such a rhythm of working so hard that you don't know how to turn it off. What was it like for you? Is that bullshit? Did you just go to the club and relax? What happened?
When I was younger, yeah, but the body can only take so much of that kind of abuse. No, I agree with, what Steve said, it kind of almost feels like a little vacuum because you're so used to running on all four cylinders that suddenly, you're still that adrenaline and energy still very much exists, but there's not that much work that's left to be done. And especially once wines are in barrel and they're going through malolactic, as a winemaker, you kind of learn this the hard way. You have to just step back and let them do their thing during that time, because the most stressful thing is to taste a wine during the malolactic process. So one of like the best pieces of advice that I got was lock up your cellar in December and then come back and taste it in January, because the wines just go through a lot of, transformation and transition during that time. And I think it kind of bodes well for us too, because that's the downtime when you start planning for what's coming next, for setting up another vintage, for the previous vintage that's in barrel that will now start to get into bottle. So there are, that little cycle starts to come back into play. But that first week right after harvest is done, it's tough. And I think the toughest part about it is knowing that you have to go back to your social calendar. All right, okay. I don't have excuses to not see people anymore.
Well, I think it also depends too on if you actually want to see people.
True.
And now I understand why you have not responded to my calls or texts, because this is
I'm
really
in
hurtful.
harvest.
Yes. No, you're not. You liar. You just told me you were not. So okay. So everything's in barrel. Now, what is the next, I don't know, month look for you? 2 months look like for you? Do you get to relax? Do you actually get to regroup? Or are you doing about face, doing something completely different?
With where we are at Signorello, we are kind of turning right around into a whole new project. We're starting construction for the new winery and kind of the whole estate rebuild. So that's what I've jumped right back into. I also do all of the vineyard management stuff at Signorello. So actually in association with Steve, who's our consulting viticulturalist, we've already started planning what we call like the winterization of the vineyard. So a lot of things for erosion control. You're talking about cover cropping to, we farm organically, and we're in the process of converting 100% towards regenerative agriculture. And these are the months to really kind of form those plans and bring those ideas into fruition. So a lot of focus on what is coming up next. You'll start to talk about, okay, the vines are going to, kind of go to sleep for the winter. But when it's come January, we're going to start pruning. We're going to start setting up another year. So there's a lot of that thought. And I think with where we're at Signorello, we've been in this kind of process of transition. And this is going to be a pretty crucial year for us, just to make sure every plan that's in motion right now gets executed correctly.
No, it sounds quite daunting in the way that, you guys have a decent amount of vineyards too. This is not some tiny operation.
Yeah.
I suppose we should mention, the 2020 fires and what you dealt with. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what happened with Signorello and how you guys pivoted and the experiments you went through? Because I think it's really fascinating and an angle that a lot of people have not discussed. You made wine.
Yeah, we did. So the fires, actually the story of Signorello and the fires kind of starts in 2017, which is when Signorello was the only Napa winery at that time that, got affected and lost and had physical damage because of the fires in 17. And I remember where I was working, we were kind of in denial about it. I'll be very honest. Northern California had fires for 2 consecutive years at that point, but all of us in Napa kind of were sitting in this, oh, it'll never happen here kind of bubble. And 17 really shook everyone up. And, it was kind of like a wake up call of, hey, we're not looking at a lot of things that we should be looking at. And so when we came here and our team kind of, we had a great 2019 vintage. It was a fantastic year to start making wines on this property. And then 2020 came. I think what was for me, like kind of the take back from 2020 was that we had a plan. We knew exactly what to do. We had already, with the year kind of being much more drier and warmer, we already started preparing the property when it came to fire damage and fire control. So like cleaned around borders, made sure there was no weeds, not a ton of ground cover. And when the fires, when we had the LNU fires and then the glass fire after that, when the LNU fires happened, like right away, I knew what I needed to get done. Like, these are the samples I'm going to pull. This is how I'm going to assess for fermentation quality. I mean, I think the part about the 2020 fires specifically that people don't think about is that up until that point, we had been farming through a pandemic. You know, a lot of people were sitting at home, whereas a lot of us here in the valley that are on the agricultural side, we came to work every day because nature wasn't stopping. The vines weren't going to stop. And so we made it work. We pivoted, not just in terms of worker safety, but even in terms of, okay, what's a priority? What can we actually get done? What absolutely does need to get done? And we got it all done. So when the fires happened in 2020, I just, from an emotional point of view, I just couldn't go with, oh, we've lost everything. I think that the fires are a reality for us, and throwing our hands up when we get hit by a catastrophe like that cannot be a feasible solution for the future of this industry. There's livelihoods at stake. You know, my crew came in and put in hard work every day during that growing season, and I didn't want those efforts to go to waste either. And ultimately, as a winemaker, I think you have to kind of put your head to the ground and say, my job is to make good wine even in a bad vintage. And that's exactly what I'm here for. Everyone can make good wine in a good vintage. So we chose to ferment, and we did a number of different trials, from washing the grapes right when we harvested to the use of shorter maceration periods. What does it look if we press, maybe go on a softer press cycle versus a heavier press cycle? What happens if maybe we use some kind of fining agent? What happens if we use tannins versus not activated charcoal? So
did you do this in separate tanks? Like, you tried different things with different, groups of wine or bunches of parcels, or did you try to actually document this? Because I mean, this is like incredibly valuable to people studying how smoke affects grapes.
Yeah, we actually have so much data. We brought in grape samples from day one of the LNU fires all the way to the last day that we brought in our actual fruit. So I didn't change our picking strategy at all, because I was very lucky that Ray Signorello, the owner, said, you know what, let's just take this as a year to learn and as a year to kind of create our game plan for the future of what are we going to do. And so we picked every block when we thought it was ready to pick, as opposed to let's just pick it now because the fires are out there and we need to bring fruit in. And so we have data that shows kind of that smoke taint accumulation in the grapes on the vines all the way from the start of the fires to when we picked. We have that whole range. And it's really interesting to see like how many days of exposure to the smoke it actually took for that pickup to be seen in the fruit. So that gave us a lot of information that, hey, maybe a one-day smoke event isn't really something to be too worried about. It really does take that extended exposure, the extended contact time for you to really start seeing that defect come in wines. And then for blocks, we would split the block up into multiple fractions. And so we'd have what we'd call a control. So the control would be you just make wine the way you would make wine, and we're not touching it. We're not changing any protocol in what we would have done. And that would kind of give you the actual value of what that smoke taint would look like if you hadn't, put in any resources to mitigate or to change that number. And then every other trial from that point gives you what change has been made because of what you changed in that protocol. So it was really, valuable information. And we do have some lots that I think are very much usable. It was also interesting to see just sensory perception. You would have wines with 3 different numerical numbers based on the chemical analysis, and you would put it in front of people to taste. And we've done this a couple of times with multiple tasting groups. And people perceive those values very differently. Some people don't pick up on it at all. And some people that are really trained for smoke taint really do pick up on it. So it's been a fascinating year. I don't feel heartbroken as much about it because I think we're walking away with just so much information.
Well, I have a major request here. I would like to, use some of this wine for blind tasting sessions for sure.
Absolutely.
Because I want to find out if people can actually pull this out. And obviously I know that it evolves over time in a bottle and everything else, but still I'm interested. It's there's a difference between smoke and like ash.
Right.
Ash taste is not good. Smoke taste, okay, look, that's we all smoked meat and things like that. The
Right.
flavor of smoke is not necessarily a negative thing, but
Right.
ash is not a good thing. So
right.
I'm
And the
curious.
presence,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and the presence of those compounds isn't dangerous. They're not detrimental to anyone's health. At least that's as far as research has shown. What is also interesting is one of the compounds, which is what we're using to kind of monitor the level of smoke-taint right now, is also naturally present in heavy toasted barrels. So, for example, if you look at...
Exactly. I mean, no, hold on. If you go to the grocery store in most places, I mean, you've got about a quarter of the bottles like Roundup. So, I mean, like... I'm sorry, that's controversial, but I mean, there are pesticides used that are clearly dangerous. That the debate is whether or not it is dangerous in wine, but no, I don't think anybody thinks. I think it's a taste thing. I think
it's a completely sensorial perception.
Yeah,
and it's fascinating. We've put it in front of trained somms and not told them that it's smoke tainted wine, and they didn't pick up on it.
Yeah, but don't you know with somms you have to tell them or else they're not going to know? I don't know if you know this. I haven't done this for 10 years.
The results of my trials and my tastings with somms told me.
If you tell them grandmother's purse is in the wine, they're going to get that. Okay? No, I'm just kidding. There's a real perception of wine, and I'm joking. You somms listening, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
All right, so when is this? Are you guys going to release this wine from 2020 to the public? Are you going to do a taste test and decide? What's the deal? How are you going to put this out?
We released our whites already because they're tasting fantastic. Really pretty flavors, really great expression of fruit, really great balance. So the Chardonnay has already been released to our allocation member list. With the reds, we currently kind of have them in what we call pre-blend stages in the cellar, because time, unfortunately, is another aspect to smoke taint. There's a gradual release of the smoke taint compounds that get naturally bound when sugar is present in the juice that will then eventually get released as the wine ages. So currently, the trial that we're doing is just waiting to see how these wines evolve. Our target bottling date for the wines would be around June or July of next year. And then our plan is to hold the bottles for another additional year to keep seeing what that evolution looks like. And then on the basis of that, we'll make our decision about releasing the reds versus not.
Okay. If you don't release the reds, what do you do with all of them? What happens? I mean, you've already got all these bottled wines. How much wine are you making?
Not a lot. I mean, our yields were pretty low. So we have just about 2,000 cases of red wine.
2,000? 2,000?
Yeah. 2,000 cases. Yeah. That's about sitting in barrels right now. We have, one of the options is just to put it on the bulk wine market. There are methods of reverse osmosis, other kinds of fining and filtration methods that will help eliminate the wine. And the wine can very much be usable at a lower price point. For us, I think we just have to be a little bit more conservative, especially with the transition that we're going through at Signorello, of really putting out a product that we truly believe reflects, what this property can do. And so that's kind of the sales or the marketing side of putting a wine out in the market as well.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make this about smoke taint and such, but I will also say for people who care, this is incredibly interesting. So I talked to Steve when the fires, we were evacuated right below the glass fire. We were there.
Wow.
It was a harrowing time, but nothing like the long term and the immediate weeks and the week after for people who are really, their livelihood and everything is tied up. We just happened to be at the wrong place, wrong time. Steve basically had this opinion, Steve Mathiasen from Psalm 1, 2, and 3, or 2 and 3. He basically said, harvest the grapes. He was sick and tired of the argument of like, look, let's let it sit on the thing. Let's deal with insurance. Let's let the grapes die. And I wonder if you and Steve are not going to have the last laugh on this. Because frankly, I know that Australia has done a lot of pioneering with the smoke taint stuff and whether or not you should harvest the grapes, ferment them, what you should do, how do you fix it, blah, blah, blah. But I do wonder if, not for everybody, it's all site specific, but if there's going to be an overwhelming amount of that wine that actually was going to be okay. I don't know. It's totally speculation. I mean, you're a real winemaker. I am someone who just watches you guys do this incredible stuff. But I wonder, do you think your 2,000 cases are going to go to the bulk wine market? What's the point of that? I bet you that.
I don't think all of it will. And I really do think it depended on where you were. So, if you were a producer that was located in St. Helena, where like the epicenter of the glass fires was, that's a tougher decision for you to make to bring the fruit, because you do know that it has been more heavily impacted than where we were on the southern end of the valley. Both Steve and I are definitely more on the southern side of the valley, where yes, we did have smoke, but it wasn't as close to the ground. It wasn't as heavy. It was definitely more lifted. And so I think, you have to kind of keep into perspective where the producer was, what they were bringing in, and kind of where in the harvest you were. But one of the messages about 2020 that I think I, heavily disagreed on is when the media just said that the vintage is canceled. I thought that was really unfair, not just to the producers, but to like every laborer that comes into this industry and puts their work into, keeping the cycle going and making things happen. For me, one of the reasons of bringing that fruit in was, well, we're not going to know if we don't do it. And the worst situation would be, okay, yeah, this isn't going to work for us. But what we found is there are a lot of solutions, and there are a lot of ways to think about this issue and how you're going to deal with it in the cellar. And for me, that is valuable experience for the future. So like if in the future, and, knock on wood, we don't have this, but I think that that's maybe being a little too idealistic at this moment. This will probably crop up again in the future, but to know that I have a very clear game plan now of how I can bring fruit in and keep this industry viable, not just for, owners, but for every person that is involved in the making of the product. That just gives me just a little bit more confidence and, a little bit ease of sleep at night, if you will.
I think it's really important to talk about this because, look, we started off with harvest. We started off with, have you got any sleep? Have you relaxed? Have you been able to adjust? And here we are talking about the other part of your job, which is you have wine in barrels.
Mm-hmm.
You are not like, it's an all-encompassing, I just can't, I can't over harp on this topic that if you are a winemaker, it's like having 1,000 children at once. And some of them are in college and some of them haven't even been born yet. And you're just all over the place. And so I admire, I think the harvest episode shows brilliantly how the planning process is so meticulous, and yet you have to throw that all out the window the next day. You've got graphs and programs and charts, and you're picking different blocks and what's the right order and what's the bricks and what's the this and what's the that. But I really do feel like what that episode did, and it's because of you guys as characters, is it showed, this is not a finite situation. It's not as like, go out there, harvest the apples, bring them in and sell them at the market. It's just not what it is. And it shows the chemistry, it shows all the stuff, but also it's very funny. You guys are very funny. I can't, you and Meg are hysterical.
Well, but that's the reality of it, and if you were to look at text groups of winemakers during harvest, all of our conversations are about shit that went wrong.
Yeah.
We really don't talk about what was
good.
Which
is what you and I are going to talk about right now. All right, so let's talk about your text chains.
Okay.
And you feel free to keep the F-bombs in and everything. What went wrong? What is a typical text chain? Who's on your text chain? So like you're in Napa.
Yeah.
You're one of the cool kids, right? So who's on your cool kid text chain up in Napa, and what are you guys saying to each other during harvest? I almost want you to pull up your text chain. Who's on it? Who gets invited to your text chain?
There's different ones, depending on what you're talking about, because that's the cool thing is a lot of us have similar philosophies, but then we also have a lot of different philosophies about the very small things, and I think that's when like the winemaker quirks come into place. And so like, for example, with this harvest, I think most of it was just about PTSD. All of us were waiting for something to go wrong. Everyone was like, are things looking good for you? Yes. Oh, okay. So it's normal, right? Yeah, okay. Because it was, the last 2 years, it's just been like, all right, okay, what's going to happen and where's it going to go? And this year, for some reason, that didn't really happen. And it was pretty nice. The yields were, of course, lower. So that was a significant part of the conversation of, things look good. Things taste good. God, I wish there was more. Especially whites, I think, got heavily impacted. With reds, it was interesting because just with how hot this year was, and not the heat, but more the lack of water, I think just irrigation and the availability of water was, in my opinion, the marker for the 21 vintage. And if you were lucky to have enough water on your property, you maybe were okay. But there were properties that unfortunately wells went dry or there just wasn't enough groundwater, and the vineyard suffered it because of those reasons. And so, things like, hey, I estimated for 5 tons, I got 1.5 tons. Like, that's kind of a pretty fuck moment because that changes everything. It changes the tank it's going to go into. It changes what your plans were for that lot. It changes the barrels it's going to end up in. It's a pretty big curveball, and not a lot of people think about that.
All right. So who is on this text chain? Who are you talking to?
Well, Megan's definitely on there.
Megan Zobak from Burgess.
Okay. Maya Dallavale, who with Dallavale Vineyards, right? Who was one of my colleagues when I worked there back, and now is.
These are some of the most badass young women in Napa you're naming. Keep going. This is really good.
Evan, who is the winemaker at Crocker and Star. Okay. She's fantastic. She's on my list. Natalie Bath, who just became winemaker at Rudd. Is just another one of my favorite people in the valley. So she's on there. Jessica Koga, who's the winemaker at Schramsberg and Davies.
I wish there was representation for male winemakers.
That's really no. I'm just kidding. I text guys. Guillaume at High Dumoulin. I love him. Reach out to him quite a bit. Braden Albrecht at my comments is one of my.
I'm going to get in so much trouble for that comment.
Shut up, Jason.
I know. I'm just joking. No,
we don't care about male opinion. Actually, no, I'm kidding.
I don't. I mean, I live in a house full of women, and they're always right. And I actually mean that. I don't mean they have to be. It's it's true. So what are these? Are these coming at 2 a.m, or are you guys pretty normal with your text chains? Like you're like a group of friends, or is this like anytime? You guys are talking 24 hours a day?
This is anytime. Macy, who is the viticulturalist with Domina Estates, every time she drives by and she sees our light tower picking, I'll get a text going, Hong Kong, just passed you guys, and I'll do the same if I'm in the valley, and I kind of, you can tell when people are picking and you just kind of give them a shout out, and these texts are so perfect because it's 3 a.m. when you're kind of wondering, what am I doing out here? Because it gets tiring after a while. And then you get these texts and you realize everyone's doing the same thing, and we're doing it because we love it and it's fun. And this is, harvest is what the year kind of comes down to at the end of it. So yeah, a lot of texting, a lot of talking. I'm so tired. Did you shower? I haven't washed my hair yet. Just all kinds of stuff. Hey, do you have any barrels left over? My order ran short, or this chemical hasn't come into the store yet. Do you have any? Can I borrow some? I had to go looking around for some N95 masks last minute because I thought I'd ordered enough and I didn't and couldn't find any, So it's just, we watch out for each other, I think. And that's always been the story of Napa. And it's cool to have your group that does it, as well. My glycol shut down. Do you have a portable glycol chiller that I could use? It could be anything, really.
Really sexy.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm a young winemaker. I'm working in Napa. What do I have to do to get on this text chain? What do I have to do? How cool do I have to be? What are the steps to get into this club?
I mean, honestly, I think just be passionate about what you do. Passion and that excitement to do this. A lot of us that are talking to each other are also have newly come into these positions, and we were excited about it. We're also kind of, nervous sometimes about our choices, and you need that just reinforcement of, no, you're doing it, you're killing it. And being a winemaker is actually, I think, a part of it that no one really talks about is ultimately you're putting out a product that says something about you. And that's more nerve-wracking than a lot of people even think about. And especially people that are doing it with intention, because you want to do it in a way that's respectful, not just to the variety, but to where it's coming from and the people behind it that are making it and the region that it's from. And when you have all of those thoughts and kind of ideas running through your head. Like, how do I tell the story? How do I tell it in a way that's authentic and real and reflective of everything that went behind the scenes? You need that kind of those shoulders and that little support system in the back too. So I'm glad that I have one, and hopefully to be there for others who are in it.
Well, I've said this before. So when we did season 1 of Verticals, there was this through line of Mondavi and the Chapelets and all of these, the Stromsberg family. There was this concept that everybody was looking out for each other, because if people failed, the whole place could go under.
Yep.
There was like this, like, we all need to succeed. And I truly believe right now, and I think people will look back at this in 10, 15, 20 years, the way we look back at the 60s. I think right now it's the exact same. It is happening right now. There is this generation of incredibly talented. I mean, look, you're one of them. It's just a fact.
Thank you.
Your wines are incredible. No, I mean, it's a fact. And it's also like, you have this very different thing. I mean, then we were mostly talking about men, it was mostly guys who were winemaking. That's not the case around every part of the wine world, but it certainly is, or was, in California. But now looking at the way it's evolved and the way people are looking out for each other, you have this incredible wealth of young talent that are doing things and not looking at it like they exist on an island. And I think Mondavi did the same thing. It was like, you're out of Chenin grapes, you don't have any Chardonnay, you don't have barrels, you need a place to ferment your wine, you don't have a spot. I just love hearing this, because as someone who documents the history and films these things, it is so badass to know that people give a shit about each other in a business that has to make money. It's really great.
I don't think I could have said it better. And I think when especially Robert Mondavi, and I kind of give him a little bit more credit, I think, just for, saying that, like, rising tide raises all boats. That is a very different way to look at things. And I think that's why Napa as a wine region has gone from a new and upcoming region to where it has kind of hit that level of prestige in terms of winemaking around the world so quickly, is because that sense of community and that sense of, if he does well, eventually I'm going to do well, is something that kind of got embedded in this community really, really early on. I mean, look, there are so many conversations that are needed to be had in our society today. But at the same time, I also do think that we have to give credit where credit is due. And I worked in many other wine regions around the world, but the fact that for me as a woman of color and as an immigrant, the fact that I found success in a region like Napa also indicates that there are people here that are still willing to give that chance, to like take a chance on someone that may not fit that normal description of who's supposed to be doing what. And I'm not the only one. There are so many fantastic examples of immigrants, of women, of people that are succeeding and are continuing to lift that bar here in Napa. And I think that it's incredibly special to be a part of it.
Look, here's a truth about wine. You don't want everything to be the same.
No.
And wine is getting more and more interesting, just based on the fact that you have different, it's not different people, it's just different views, different viewpoints. That translates into the wine. And I don't like to sit at a table and drink the same stuff over and over and over again. It is not interesting. And the vintages in a place like California, part of the reason you make wine here is it doesn't change so much. You have a good playground, providing there's no fires and, the water's okay and things. It's not a region that floods often. It's not a region that has problems. So I find it to be, as a storyteller, infinitely more interesting to have more viewpoints in the wine. Steve Mathiasen and his wife, Jill, have done more to open my eyes to what can be made in Napa than almost anybody. And there's nobody that wants to see it expand more than them.
Right.
They would do anything to expand it to more viewpoints. So
no, absolutely. And I think, when a region's growing and when an area is getting established, you're going to go through these growth curves, right? Like you would when you're establishing a business, because when you started out with an idea, and then based on what is succeeding, you kind of end up following the path that maybe guarantees you the most success. And that's what happened through the 90s and that early 2000s when scoring came into place and people realized, oh my God, if I get the score, I'm going to be able to sell my wine. That's my pathway to success. And that in some ways did limit that expression or the identity of what was being put out there. But I think the fact that just over this last decade, there's been a couple of different reasons. One, I think bringing estate winemakers has been the shift that has like really pushed. Because when you have a person that's stewarding a property from the vineyard all the way into the bottle, you are going to see that expression of that, individual philosophy come into play. And that's been so cool to see that. And people like Tom Farella, Pam Starr, and these are the people, or Kathy Corson, that said, you know what? I know I can make great wine for someone else, but I know I can make the wine I want to make if I do it right. And
Kathy's a great example.
And they started the trend of doing it. And now that they have, paid the price and toiled and gotten success, people realize, hey, there is a market for me to go out there and just make the wines I want to make and make them in the most fun, the most interesting, and the most exciting way possible. And Napa's always had that vein, but I think this emphasis that we're now giving to like telling the stories and talking about the place and the varieties and the regions, it's the next decade of Napa is going to be pretty exciting to follow.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah.
I mean, as a film director, I believe there should be somebody who has to take the responsibility when it goes bad and somebody who gives credit to everyone who deserves it when it goes well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that winemaker is certainly that position when it comes to wine. And man, it's good to hear, good news is the wine you make, you don't need to know any of this shit. It's delicious. It doesn't even matter. So like you can talk about this stuff to the end of the day, but the truth is, the wine in the glass is delicious, so it's great.
Yeah.
It's just amplified by knowing these things. So I hope that tonight, I know you're a big fan of The Office. I hope you're going to watch some episodes.
Yeah. Sorry.
I forgot to tell people that you were drunk right now.
I mean, as a filmmaker, my dream is that I don't know what kind of permissions would be needed to do this, but if we could do The Office Napa,
The Office Napa,
I've got people.
It would be what's the company they work? So it's not a paper company. It's
It wouldn't be a paper company. It would, I would say maybe like a wine warehouse company would be the most fun.
So it's like a wine like label printing company or something.
Or something like that, yeah.
Because it's got to be really boring and not exciting as a job.
Well, that's why like the wine warehouse where all you do is like ship in, ship out, bring in, bring out. Like you're the middleman that like helps take things from one place to the other. I have ideas.
I mean, you probably couldn't call it The Office, use any of the music, or have any of the actors in it. But other than that, it'd be fine. It'd be easy. Priyanka, it is so good to have you on. I'm looking forward very much to having a glass with you soon.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, get some sleep, kid.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you're interested in the wines that Priyanka makes over at Signorello, it's signorelloestate.com. Great stuff. Really, really incredible wines over there in Napa. Go to somtv.com to subscribe, $49.99 for the year. And if you are a subscriber, check out the Harvest documentary. She's really great in that. And make sure you watch A Chef's Voyage. Don't forget, November 23rd, we are dropping Sparklers. This is a long time coming, big time show. All right, everybody, please be safe. We love you. Bye.